I think we could call this legislative week because on the program through Friday, we're going to have members of our local legislative delegation, some of them coming in and chatting with us, really giving us a preview of what we can expect this upcoming session in Boise. And I know even after New Year's Day, I have a note somewhere in my email that I've got to actually talk to some of the guys on the other side as well. So Clark Kauffman's friend Matt Erpelding will be back with us, and who, by the way, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Matt does not come across as being. We think of sometimes Democrats in this day and age as these, noisy liberals who all want people to change the way they live, and he does not come across that way. He actually seems to be a little bit more. I won't say he's a conservative Democrat, but he might harken back to a day when in Idaho there were a lot more middle of the road Democrats. I get that impression when I speak to him on the air. You get along, though, it seems, well with everybody. You've mentioned this before, that you don't have a lot of battles with your fellow legislators.
Well, Matt's a great guy to visit with, and we don't agree on issues a lot of times, but we have fun debating the issues, and it helps both of us become better spokesmen for our group.
The last time you were here, you guys were on back-to-back days, if I recall.
Oh.
And so we'll be talking to him sometime, I think, after session gets winding up, which is only a few days away, right?
A couple days away. About a week from now, we'll be up there. The session doesn't start till the 6th, but we'll be up there getting ready and meetings and economic forecast meetings.
One thing we're not going to see this year, I guess the transportation issue now is on the back burner because of the Garvey bonds. So that had been an issue that had gotten a lot of discussion over the last few years. So at least this year, that's not going to take up a lot of your time. You're going to be able to focus on, so I say that he smiles. It may come back, right? It depends on how bad the roads get again. But I'm going to guess that you're going to be focused on a few other things, maybe more attention in other areas.
Probably be playing maybe a little bit of defense on some other issues. Infrastructure and roads and bridges is always on my front burner. There may be some legislation to try and move some money from one place to another to help transportation. Last year, with the getting the surplus eliminator extended another 2 years, and locals being sharing in that 60-40 with ITD, I think was a big step. And there may be some legislation this year looking at just eliminating that sunset on the surplus eliminator. So we could count on it being as an ongoing program.
Anything, if you were to compile a list of priorities that really sticks out for you this year?
For the legislature or for me?
Yeah, let's say you individually. Yeah.
Well, I'll be working again on a sales tax exemption for members of the Association of Free and Charitable Clinics. I don't think a free clinic that gives free medical clinic, primary care, and does it mostly with volunteers should be paying sales tax. So I'll be bringing a bill to add them to that list of exemptions for sales tax.
Mentioning tax, sales tax, groceries will come up again, I'm sure.
That will, yeah.
But it'll come up, I'm told, a lot earlier than it did last year.
It'll probably be one of the first bills, yeah. I voted against it last time for eliminating that sales tax on groceries. I wasn't comfortable that there was a good definition of groceries. There was the SNAP definition, and then there's the other definition for, I forget what they call that one, but it was a little more restrictive, but nobody knew what exactly it was. And since then, IACI, who represents businesses, has come out against eliminating that tax. And so we'll see what the bill looks like, but if it's like it was last year, I would probably vote against that again.
I know there are people who don't like it, but we've been on the air the last few weeks mentioning the 48th lowest tax burden in the country is here in Idaho. So we're not suffering like they are in a lot of the blue states when it comes to taxes. The thing is, if you eliminate it, you still likely have to find some place to replace that revenue, which that's the flip side of this coin. We're not spending a lot of money as it is. So I don't think anyone at this point has come up with that alternative, have they?
Well, the argument I've heard is that it'll come out of growth, the growth which we've had, and that's always question, what do you do with that excess above what you predicted would come in? And, I would put it on the roads, but then there's others who would put it toward education or health and welfare or whatever. Uh, so we'll have that discussion. It'll be lively, I'm sure.
The other aspect of this, I think, too, is you could say, all right, we're not going to tax a sack of potatoes because those are good for people, but maybe we tax Doritos. Frito-Lay might have a lobby that doesn't like that, and they would just say it's a corn tax, I suppose. But it could be somewhat of a you could divvy this up in a sense where certain things were taxed that people don't necessarily need, and then you could still maybe free up other items that people, I mean, that are nutritious for people.
And and that comes back to my definition of what is food.
Right.
And if you're a retailer, um, are you going to have to buy new software to implement that, or how is that all going to work? If you use the SNAP definition, the software is probably there. Um, but if you change that very much as a retailer, I was in the store the other day, bought some insulators, fence insulators, and the girl behind there said, "Is this tax exempt?" And I said, "Beats me." She says, "Well, I think it's temporary. So if it's temporary, it's tax exempt." So,
And
um,
that's part of the problem we face with this grocery tax is that what exactly constitutes this grocery item? Uh, the majority of people nowadays go to the big box stores,
Hmm.
and they have everything in there. So you could have a basket full of goods, half of which may be clothing and household items, and the other half could be grocery items. So we're scanning these things through there as fast as they can run that machine, and this one's taxable and this one's not. Well, hello, how do we make that distinction? And I'm with Clark on this one. I go to a farm store to buy. I'm not once again. I'm not one of your big time farm boys, but I do go in there once in a while and buy various supplies to keep my little place running. Well, at the same time, I might pick up other items. So is this taxable and this exempt? How does the girl behind the counter know? And Clark's correct. The behind the scenes uh, software management, the data processing management is just going to be overwhelming.
We've got a caller looking to join us. Caller, you're on the air with State Representative Clark Kauffman on KLIX.
Yeah, it's just funny. This is supposed to be the lowest tax state, but yet we got a grocery tax. I'm from a state that does not have a grocery tax, and that affects the poor people more than anything else.
I hear that argument a lot.
and everybody uses services. So I'm of the opinion that everybody should have a little skin in the game. If the people are really poor and they're on assistance or food stamps, they don't pay the sales tax. There's no sales tax on those. So I think everybody has an obligation to pay a little bit of tax, and the low income people use services. So I think it's only fair that they pay a little bit of tax, and groceries might be the only thing they pay the tax on.
I got a note, by the way. I know so many of the callers now so well by their voices. I can tell when they have a cold versus when they don't. So I do wish him well. I want to thank him for the call. Some other things that you have on your agenda that we might be hearing about.
Well, I think it's along with the tax cuts, the grocery tax, replenish the aquifer. I think we need to continue to look at setting money aside to build the infrastructure on the years that we have excess water to get the water out into the aquifer. We've said for years that the water is the main thing, the most important thing in the Magic Valley, in the Snake River Plain, but collectively we haven't treated it that way. And I think we've taken a step to do that now with recharge. And we recharged a lot of water last year, and the Sentinel wells that they measure those with have showed an increase. So we are making progress. And this way it keeps everybody in business. The junior rights water holders have safe harbor from a call as long as there is progress being made to stabilize or increase the aquifer.
We should note from here all the way to Ontario, if you drive and you see the growth, you realize there's a lot of people now drawing on that weren't in the past. We'll squeeze a caller in with us. It's 9:16. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Representative Kauffman. Go ahead. Oh, you may have answered the question from that particular caller. So we're also, though, the fact of the matter is that aquifer, which is huge, when you look at it in North America, one of the biggest. I think it's second largest, right?
I'm not sure about that.
But it's massive.
Huge, yeah.
But if we lose that, or we have issues with that, agriculture, which is still our number one industry, would take a huge hit.
Yeah, and look at all the things that agriculture affects, the value-added processing that goes on in the valley. I was just on a cotton tour in Texas, and they're pumping out of the Ogallala aquifer, and it's going down and it's drying up, and those people have no way to recharge that. And so their alternative is, how do we do a better job of dryland farming? They're trying to figure out how to dryland farm cotton and corn, relying on rainfall that's pretty sparse down in South Texas. But we have the opportunity here to recharge that when we have excess water from snowfall. So I think we're on the right track here.
Got about a minute and a half before the break. We'll get a caller in. We may not get to an answer right away, but caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Clark Kauffman. Go ahead.
Hello, good day. My knowledge of the aquifer, if it's the one I think you're talking about, is the one that originates in Wyoming, and we can put lots of water in the ground here. But what's happening upstream to replenish water that's missing from up there?
Do we have time to answer that?
We got about a minute.
Okay. From what I understand, I don't know what's going on in Wyoming as far as recharge, but in the upper Snake reaches, they're building infrastructure there too, and that's part of what this money is for, to recharge above American Falls. And so you have to have the infrastructure to get the water from the river out to the recharge sites, which we're really fortunate to have some lava flows that accept the water rapidly. So there is discussions, and the Upper Snake is part of the discussion also.
And you're likely working, I think, closely with the legislature in Wyoming as well, because there has to be some sort of cooperative effort.
I'm not sure of any recharge efforts with Wyoming, but it could be.
Maybe we need to get him on the phone.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We talk about, well, why do we have to spend so much state revenue, resource, money to build these aquifer things? And I think Clark hit it right on the nail on the head here. It isn't just a matter of poof. We have to divert the water. Wrong word, but I think everybody will divert the water out of the river channel, out into the lava flow areas. They drill holes down in there, big, 12 to 15-inch diameter holes, and just let the water percolate down. But you got to somehow get it from the river, the natural flow, back out into these recharge areas. That's a lot of money.
We've got more coming up. I want to mention Clark Kauffman, Steve Millington in studio with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We're at 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. We'll take more of your telephone calls, too. It's 27. I wanted to mention we're joined in studio this morning by State Representative Clark Kauffman. He is with us likely this entire hour because people apparently want to talk to him this morning. I noticed by the action on the activity on the phone lines. Steve Millington as well, joining me, Bill Colley, this morning. We're at 28 now, 9:21 on the program. Steve just brought up something very interesting during the break, which a lot of us have been probably thinking, what happens next? Steve was bringing it up, the designation that Twin Falls is now an urban area.
That's right. According to the Department of Census, from the Labor Department, anytime a city crosses this 50,000 population threshold, that makes them an urban metropolitan area. Now, not to be confused with New York City or Salt Lake City or even Boise. This is more of an urban metropolitan area, and we're transitioning from our little small town to a medium-sized town. Brings with it a lot of additional regulatory requirements. One, we have to have a bus service. Nobody rides the buses, but we have to have a bus service. That's mandated when you hit that 50,000, and there's other things that go with it. One of the things that the city engineer, Jackie Fields, if I got the right name on that, I
Yeah.
hope I do. She said, yeah, we're looking at all kinds of issues again right here. We're going to have to make sure that our wastewater is up to grid and uh, uh, not stream flow, but uh, not wastewater, but storm drains.
Storm drains, yeah.
They're going to have to figure out a way to accommodate all of that different from what we've done in the past, simply because we now designated with this higher category. My guess is that the city of Twin Falls is going to come looking for some money, Representative Clark Kauffman. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure that they will. I know that that designation, they have to form an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Operation or organization,
Uh-huh.
and that changes the way their transportation is funded. And that MPO could include surrounding communities, probably Kimberly, possibly Filer. I've heard even maybe Jerome, and I don't know if that
Well, somewhere I
the
read
MPO part of it.
that this urban metropolitan area is going to include, quote, most of Twin Falls County and Jerome County.
That
So you're probably
that
right.
could be, yeah. So the transportation funding for that comes a little different direction, and they have to have an MPO to plan transportation and the projects within that MPO. So it's a lot like the Greater Twin Falls Area Transportation Group, except this group will have a board of directors that actually has funding.
Think about the plus, though. You'll have buses running to the fair. So we've got another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on Top Story.
Yes, quickly on recharge. The Bureau of Reclamation or the environmentalists and make us run 250,000 acre feet down the Snake to the Columbia to help cool the water for the fish. 250,000 acre feet. Our goal is to recharge 250,000 acre feet. And can you imagine on a water year that is low, that we're running water down the river that we need so desperately here in the state because of environmental BS, and we could be recharging the aquifer. And it's a dirty shame. Yeah, luckily we've had extra water, but it's something to think about. I'll hang up.
That stands for barley soup, by the way, but go ahead.
I agree. There are a lot of rules and agreements that have been reached. Swan Falls Agreement is one agreement with Idaho Power to keep so much water at Swan Falls. The thing that comes to my mind is that if you don't have the infrastructure available on the years where you have excess water, it all goes down the Columbia. So I'm certainly in favor of building the infrastructure so that on the 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 or 4 out of 10 years, whatever it is, that Mother Nature gives us excess water, we can put it out there and help stabilize and recharge the aquifer.
We had a caller earlier today who said that the county level we're dealing with people who are taking dictation from the United Nations with building codes and the like. And since we talk about a growing metropolitan area here, and then they said, we need to have state legislators do something about this. I don't know a lot about that. Is that true?
Well, when I spent 4 years on the business committee before I moved to resources committee. On the business committee, we dealt with licensing and insurance and all of the trades, that licensing for the trades and the building codes. And the International Building Code, as I recall from my past experience, is a list of codes that is accepted by generally the world, and the United States accepts that, and then the Idaho has the option of accepting parts or all of that.
So it could be voluntary that some of it could be rejected.
Right, and we didn't always, depending on the testimony from builders and so on, we didn't always adopt all of the code.
We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air at 927 with Representative Clark Kauffman.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my call, and Happy New Year to everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Anyway, over here in Jerome County, we've got a problem out in the country. You've been speaking of water, of people drowning the roads. They think they're going to grow something on the roads by watering the roads with their overshots from their center pivots. And the water that's wasted, the money that's wasted on, having to keep the roads up, the shoulders getting wet, soaking in, the road falls apart. Is there any way that the state could kind of get involved in something like that, put a little teeth in it? I've called it in several times. I know other people would have, and nothing's being done about it during the summer. Could you guys get involved in, because the water that's wasted, the money that's wasted over here is just horrendous on this, and people just don't seem to give a damn that are doing it. And unless the sheriff will put some teeth into it, and I'm not knocking the sheriff, he's doing a great job, but unless the deputies and him have put some teeth into it, nothing's going to change.
Well, go ahead, Representative.
Yes, and water on the road. I spent about 16, 17 years as a highway district commissioner before I was a legislator, and we dealt with that all the time, and we worked hard to get language in the code to make it's illegal to squirt water on the roads from an end pivot. But you have to have enforcement. So if you have a code enforcement officer, he can come out and write tickets, but to get the ticket prosecuted is kind of another layer that we always dealt with. So I'm with you. I've seen the damage on the roads from water on the roads, and there's in the code there is ways that if it's a wind thing, it's mitigated. But there are those who just water the road because they don't want to waste anything on the edge, and it is against the law. There is state code that addresses that. We just need enforcement.
Janice Stegner had an experience one day where she was driving her convertible and passed through one of those situations. Apparently it wasn't much fun. We've got a short break. Clark Kauffman going to stick around with us this morning. You can stick around, right? These are busy guys, but we're hopefully going to take a little bit more time to talk about some of these issues coming up in the next half hour. Steve Millington also in studio with us. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 27. We've got a member of Idaho State Legislature in the studio with us this hour, Clark Kauffman, a representative joining us. Steve Millington as well. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 9:34 and the temperature 24. Seems to be ping-ponging around this morning. About a high of 30 today, and then we'll be warming up throughout the week. We were just talking off air about a couple of other things that you're going to be bringing up during the legislative session. One of these is a trespass law, or at least I guess trying to make it clear what trespass law actually is. And there have been some situations. A lot of times laws come about because, well, a constituent gets in touch with you and says, I got a problem here, and this seems to be one of those.
I was asked to carry this trespass law, and I read it, and I think it's a good bill. It more clearly defines the difference between a criminal trespass and a civil trespass, and it addresses some of the fines that are associated with that, raises some of the fines, makes them a little more enforceable, I think. But it came about because a landowner bought a big parcel of land that all the neighbors thought in the past 2 generations probably that it was public land, and they'd hunted there and fished there and cut timber there and done all kinds of things. The new landowner would rather that they ask before they go on, and there's been a little conflict there, I guess. I liken it to you live in a neighborhood and there's a swimming pool, and the neighbors lets all the neighbors swim there, and then he sells his house and moves somewhere else, and the new owner's there, and he looks out and there's people in the swimming pool, and he says, what are you doing in my swimming pool? And they say, well, we've always swam here. And he says, well, there's a new owner, you can't do that anymore. So that's kind of the example that I use.
We have a caller with us, and it's 9:36, or close enough. Caller, you're up next, and you're on Top Story. Go ahead. Oh, another caller taking a day off, I guess. When you bring this up, this is one of those things that's just, I guess, making clear what the law is. Because already you could likely have someone thrown off the property.
You could, but the The difference between criminal trespass and civil trespass has never been really clearly defined, and we're just trying to make it more clear so that when somebody is cited for which one did I say, the civil trespass, that it does have some teeth in it.
In other words, they're not necessarily going to be locked away for a long time, but at least
No.
they'll get a reminder that you don't do this.
Yeah, it'll be easier to enforce.
Wanted to point out, telephone number to reach the program is 208-736-0300. That's 208-736-0300. In another area you wanted to touch on, I mean, you have a background, obviously, in farming, food safety.
For the last several years, I've served on the Idaho Department of Agriculture's Food Safety Modernization Act Advisory Committee. Food Safety Modernization Act, they call it FSMA. It's the first rewrite of the food safety laws in about 30 years, trying to move the food safety from reactive to proactive. And it has a lot of repercussions, I guess it could have for local producers. There's like 7 different silos of enforcement, and 2 years ago we passed a piece of legislation that opened the door for, if Idaho took primacy of any of those silos, that the Department of Ag would be the enforcer of that and not the Department of Health and Welfare. So now it has moved farther, and this would be called the Idaho Produce Safety Law. It will be people that fall under this, which are major manufacturers of produce or food, would be like the McCain's or the bigger producers.
The Glambias, for example.
Not Glambia, that's dairy. That's under.
Oh, so this is food stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
produce.
Processed produce. Yeah.
We wanted to mention Clark Kauffman is a member of Idaho's state legislature, serves on the House side. He is with us till 10 o'clock this morning. We have a short break coming up in just about a minute, but if you have a question or comment as well, feel free to give us a call, and that number is 208-736-0300. Just very quickly, since we've just got a few seconds, about 30 before the break, I referenced Matt Erpelding earlier. We did not see any of the social issues come up last year during the legislative session. It was very quiet. Will we see that again this year? Has most of that been pushed off to the side so we can concentrate on mainly the economic issues?
None of that is on my radar, but it could come up, but I'm not aware of anything social coming up of those issues.
It seems that the Democrats have decided that that's not the hill they want to continually die on.
Maybe not. No.
We've got more on the way in just a few minutes. It's 24. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. We have this music especially for our guest. He kind of prowls the halls in Boise with his silk suit and his PPK strapped within his coat. Can you actually carry inside the legislature?
Sure.
So legislators can do that if they choose.
Sure.
Because we don't talk about that a lot, and we don't want to give anybody ideas. But legislative bodies are targets, and we've discovered that, I think, last summer with the baseball practice in Washington. And so there's obviously security that's already in place, but I'm sure that a lot of the people who are serving right now, you served in the military yourself, so you have a little bit of background. You know how to handle one of those things.
Yeah.
We don't talk a lot about the Second Amendment on the state level, but it's still obviously important. I heard Kelly Packer speak at an event here a few weeks ago. The Kiwanis Club had a forum for the 5 candidates for lieutenant governor, and she referenced that right away. But I think that when you speak about the Idaho legislature, so there are some Republicans who call themselves the Liberty legislators. Some call themselves Liberty Caucus. Some just call themselves Republicans. But it seems to me that across the board, there's strong support for the Second Amendment.
I've not seen anything to counter that, no. Strong Second Amendment, both sides of the aisle.
Want to mention Clark Kauffman is joining us from the Idaho State Legislature this morning. We're coming up on 9:43. We're at 28. Bill Colley with you as well. Steve Millington is in the studio too. Telephone number to reach us, 208-736-0300, 208-736-0300. I have been invited to an event that the Liberty Caucus, well, if that's even technically what they call themselves, they're throwing an event, I think it's in Meridian, coming up January 4th. And I've been invited to attend, and I think I'll go just if I can manage it, out of an interest just to see what they're talking about. But I have to say that I think there's one thing that we had, there's been some differences of opinion, more so within the Republican caucus the last couple of years than with the Democrats. But it seems to me that when you come right down to it, most of those legislators in that group tend to vote along the same lines as all the other Republicans. I just think there's a lack of trust that may be going on between the two groups. If you could maybe repair that, would it be quieter?
And I've always worked to repair that. Try to understand what their issues are. There's a lot of no votes in that group on issues that I vote yes on. I believe that in the end you have to govern, and compromise isn't a dirty word. And to govern, you have to visit with people. You have to discuss things with them, and I do that all the time. But sometimes we agree to disagree.
We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
When the president threatened to send National Guard troops into Chicago a few weeks back, and the mayor asked for United Nations peacekeepers to come in there for disarmament. So the mayor evidently has some kind of a operating agreement with the United Nations peacekeeping efforts. So how many cities in Idaho have similar operating agreements with the United Nations? Citizens of Idaho have a right to know.
Is that an interesting question? Have you had that one before?
I have not had that question before, and
maybe Pocatello.
Maybe Boise.
I would certainly ask some city people that, but I don't know of any cities in Idaho that have any agreement with a United Nations.
It wouldn't work anyway.
No, our Constitution wouldn't allow that.
Idaho's Constitution would not.
Right.
We have another caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on Top Story.
Good morning, guys. Hey, got a quick throwback, if I can, back to these pivots that are spraying on the roads. And my question would be this: is there some type of a county code that could be put in place where each of these pivots, which have the manufacturer name on the end of them, could have just like a numeric code or something that would tie back to the person who has the responsibility for that pivot, so that it doesn't necessarily become a law enforcement issue, knowing that those guys are spread pretty thin? Just wanted to get your ideas on that.
In visiting with the code enforcement officer in Twin Falls County, he pretty well knows who those folks are, because most of them are repeat offenders, and they do the research, and they go out and they find out who owns them, and they give them a call and have them turn the end gun off. But as far as identifying them with something on the end of the pivot, I think that would be another layer of government we probably don't need, because the code enforcement officer who drives around and somebody reports it, they find out who the owner is and they get them on speed dial.
I was going to say, with the caller from Jerome County mentioned in the last half hour that they have the issue. At least the sheriff there has an air patrol. That is, individually he flies. He could be flying over and picking all these out as they happen. Yeah. I don't know that I volunteered him for that, but I'll hear about it if I did. We have another caller with us, but Steve, go ahead. We'll take the caller first. Caller, you're up next at 947. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Hey, my comment is regarding the trespass legislation that's been discussed. I think a big issue going on here, and this is with the hunter community, is the fact that there's a lot of either Forest Service or BLM land that is out there that's not accessible, because there's more and more landowners choosing to post a property and not allow access. So I myself am experiencing, a real decline in hunting in the state. Last year, my son drew in Unit 55, and there's just huge sections that are simply not accessible. There's game in there, but you can't get to them because landowners don't allow access. And I drew this year in the same hunt, same problem, and I think that's a big issue. And I'd certainly encourage in this legislation that there be some kind of compromise put in to allow access, and maybe there can be some kind of carrot in there to for these landowners to allow that. But I think it's a shame that have all this these vast public properties that the taxpayers paying for, but we can't have access to. So with that, I'll just leave it up to the discussion.
Thank you for the question. Last year in the Resources Committee, we had quite a discussion on this about how do you find out what is public lands and how it's accessible. The Department of Lands has a map that you can access online that shows all of those parcels, and there are a few of them that are landlocked, but most of those are state land, as I understand, because the state got certain sections during the act that formed our state, and some of those have private land around them, but there aren't. I looked at the map, there wasn't that many that were landlocked, but the Department of Lands, if you go to their website and look at that map, I think that would be helpful. And there are also apps you can get on your phone that tell you right where you're at. They track you and tell you if you're on public land or private land.
Steve Millington, you had something that you were going to add as well.
Well, part of the problem we run into is that, and I don't want to throw rocks at anybody, but sometimes the private landowners become a little bit disgusted with the frequency of travel, and let's get real. How often have we seen articles in the newspaper about on the north side of the Snake River Canyon in Jerome? They've got those shooting ranges and stuff out there, and people go out there and just litter and make a general mess and become a nuisance, and the county has to go in and clean it up, and to some extent we do that same thing on somebody else's private property. And the Boy Scouts instituted a program a few years ago, haul it in, haul it out. That's the wrong word, but that's the intent. So if you call and ask somebody, make it a habit to identify and ask permission. And if you haul garbage in there, haul it back out.
We have a caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello. My name is Mark Berlin. I'm calling in regards to enforcement of county ordinances within the county. And I believe I gave Mr. Kauffman a report I had written on a violation that occurred next door to me.
Yes, sir. I missed you the other day when you stopped by the house there. I got your note. I have looked at the report you gave me, and I visited with the county commissioners. And according to them and their legal team, there is no violation there with what is going on. So,
well, with that operation was running for at least a year before he was advised by the Sheriff's Department to file for an ordinance to operate. The Planning and Zoning Commission denied him twice because it doesn't fall under the ordinance in this area. It has reduced my property value, and the Board of Commissioners twice, and the last time gave him the authorization to run his business, and his business, he claims, was ag supported, and all he does is aggregate material hauling. And any business in Twin Falls County, somewhere or another, has supports the ag in some way or the other.
Can I add, the caller obviously brings up a point about an issue he's got with somebody where he lives. He came to you. You're really, though, just an intermediary between county government and this fellow.
yes.
So he really, the argument, does he have to go to the county commission and make his case there? How does that work?
I believe he has, but unhappy with the results, and I understand that. But I read the report you gave me, and it was a very good report, but I am not in a position to make any ruling on that or other than just have an opinion. But I did visit with the county commissioners and about that. So it's kind of out of my hands.
Want to thank him for the telephone call. Speaking of land issues, there are a couple of brothers from Texas who are buying up huge swaths of land in 3 states, Wyoming, Montana, and in eastern Idaho. And they're buying tens of thousands of acres each time they do this. There's a lot of concern, especially among sportsmen, that they're going to lose access. Again, there's not a lot we can do here because they're buying the land legally, I would assume.
Yeah, it's private land. We do respect property rights in Idaho, and private land is private, and if you want to hunt or fish on it, you need to get permission.
I asked Governor Otter at one of his Capital for a Day programs about people who leave overturned washing machines in the front yard and the like, and he said, you know what? This is a state where it may not necessarily be pretty, and it may bother you when you drive by, but we tend to respect the fact we err on the side of that property owner.
Yeah, I agree. Private property is a right that we have, and I believe that is a right that we need to protect.
We want to put out, we've got a couple of minutes to go. The caller mentioned that he came to you and delivered the report, but we have to understand, too, that it's not like state legislators. It doesn't roll downhill necessarily. When it comes to county government, you can't walk in and say, you've got to do this. It doesn't work that way in that sense. And again, your role was as an intermediary, but my guess is you get a lot of that where people believe that, look, the federal government often tells the state what to do. Why isn't the state telling local government what to do?
And the local government is elected officials. We're all elected officials. We answer to the people that elected us. We try and do our best job with that, and we don't always agree that it's proper or correct, but we all do our best. So there are separations there between county and state government.
We wanted to point out, too, as well, session you said starts January 6th.
I believe so.
6th?
Yeah.
Is that a weekend?
No, it's first Monday.
First Monday.
I think that the Representative Kauffman has meetings that start like the 3rd or 4th of January, committee assignments and so forth. The first actual day of the legislature, I think, is January 8th.
The 8th.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, 8th.
Yeah, 8th.
January 8th, on Monday.
Now, see that the state central committee has their winter meeting immediately prior to the
Start of the session.
start of the legislative session. And our meeting is going to be the 5th and 6th of January in Boise. And the reason they always have it in Boise that weekend is that most legislators from throughout the state will be there gearing up, getting prepared for their legislative session beginning on Monday.
Got about a minute left. A lot of what we talked about today, if you think about it, all of these issues, whether it be water, whether it be problems with neighbors, trespassing, whether it be land use of any kind, all of these things, the designation of Twin Falls as an urban area, all of these things lead us back, I guess, to the question. We're dealing with a lot of population issues, and those are only going to continue. And we can't put up a gate that says, don't come to Idaho. But it seems to me that that's the big challenge we're going to be dealing with going forward, is that huge spike in population, which is going to continue for who knows how long.
I agree. We've just been designated the fastest growing state in the nation. Some people like that, some don't. It brings opportunities as well as challenges. And some of the challenges, I think as long as we're aware that it's happening, we can be proactive on some of the issues. Like Steve and I were talking earlier about more kids in school. You're going to have more toward education. You're going to have more infrastructure to move people from here to there and to move your goods. So there are opportunities as well as challenges. And if our state was in decline, we would have challenges also. And that's probably a harder challenge than growth.
I want to thank you for coming by today. I do want to mention some of your colleagues will be coming through here this week as well. They are all representing different committees, and so we'll have some different topics. I want to thank Representative Clark Kauffman for kicking this off for us this week. Steve Millington, too, as well, for joining us. And, of course, He's a little familiar with the studio lately, maybe more so than usual.
Appreciated it. Thank you very much,
I want to
Bill.
thank you too as well. Gave me time to sleep in a little bit the past week. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning, Wednesday. Rush Limbaugh is coming up next following the news from Fox.